Hi, everyone. Deanna Crofts-Pelayo here with the California Governor's Office of Emergency Services. Appreciate you taking the time today to really hear from us a little bit about these March storms, what we're seeing kind of come in the next few days, and how you can be a part of our Trusted Messenger Network to help get the word out on preparedness, response, and recovery efforts in your communities locally. Let's go to the next slide so we can show some of who we are going to talk with today. And so you'll hear a little bit from a few different people. Number one, David Lawrence with the National Weather Service, who's really going to be talking about expected weather conditions in high impact areas over the coming days. Then you will hear about the state's coordinated preparation and response efforts ahead of this storm and the ones previously too, from Brian Ferguson, our Deputy Director of Crisis Communication and Public Affairs. Then you will hear from our Chief of Access and Functional Needs, Vance Taylor, here at Cal OES, talking about keeping vulnerable communities safer, those at-risk populations. What are the key things that we are doing to help them? You'll hear then from Corrin Buchanan, Deputy Secretary of the California Health and Human Services Agency, on resources available not only on physical health, mental health. These are really trying times. And then we'll go into questions at the end, but before that, we will also talk about the valuable life-saving resources we have that you can provide for your network as well. Includes graphics, social media, all of that good stuff too. So let's go to the next slide. I'm going to hand it over to David Lawrence. He is with the National Weather Service. He's been embedded in our State Operations Center, and we appreciate all of the information he's going to be giving us. Thank you, David.
Thanks so much, Deanna, and good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to provide you with the latest information on what we expect for this upcoming series of storms. I really want to highlight up front that this is likely to be a very impactful storm. I know we've had several of those already this winter season. This one is yet another in a string of recent storms that is likely to produce fairly widespread impacts, particularly across central and northern California, but also possibly in the southern portions of the state. And talk about some of those details a little more closely here in the next few minutes. Really quick up front, I just visually wanted to show you, this is a satellite image taken from space yesterday. You can see California obviously off to the right there labeled, but all of those white clouds and everything sort of pointed right at the state. That is all of the moisture that will be arriving across much of California beginning late today. That's late Monday, but especially Monday night into the day Tuesday. And this storm system will then exit the state, but by the time we get toward the middle of the day Wednesday. As I mentioned already, some significant impacts are very likely. Next slide, please. So I know this is a lot of text, and I'm not a text person when it comes to slides, but I really want to get these points across. Feel free to take a screenshot of this and share it, or some of these slides might be shared. This is really what we want you to know, is that additional flooding on rivers is quite likely. We're already seeing some very high water in some areas. That will continue and or get worse as we go over the next couple of days, with 2 to 5 inches of rain expected across much of northern and central California. Some locations are likely to pick up localized amounts in excess of 8 inches, possibly as much as 10 inches with a few of these heavier rain showers. We're also expecting the potential for flash flooding, not only river flooding, which happens on a longer time span, but that really short-term flooding that can develop quite rapidly, as some of the rainfall rates will exceed 1 inch each hour. We're also looking for significant travel impacts across the High Sierra. This is not only a rainstorm, but it's also going to be additional snow for high elevations, particularly above around 4,000 to 5,000 feet in far northern California. And as we go into the Sierra, snow levels will be around 7,000 to 8,000 feet for the duration of this event. Across Southern California, most of this precipitation will fall in liquid form. There is also the possibility for additional rock slides and mudslides, much like we have seen over the past couple of days with this previous weather event. And not to be left out, we also will see some very strong winds develop from many areas of the state, particularly from the Central Coast into the Bay Area, across the Sacramento Valley, and then spreading into the Sierra. For the lower elevations, wind gusts of 40 to 60 miles per hour are likely during this storm. And over the higher terrain, the higher Sierra, wind gusts to around 80 miles per hour can be expected. Those winds will not only produce some blowing snow in the mountains and cause some additional travel difficulties, but those winds may also produce some tree damage and power outages for some of the lower elevations, particularly those that see winds approaching 60 miles per hour. Again, I really want to stress that this is likely to be a very impactful storm. If you're curious about location, right now, the greatest threat for widespread flash flooding will exist from portions of the Central Coast. That's generally Monterey County all the way down through San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties, and into the western slopes of the Southern Sierra and the Southern San Joaquin Valley. That's not to say we can't see flash flooding in other portions of the state, but those areas in particular could be hit with a much higher risk of flash flooding. I've also heard some questions from many people. I think we all sort of want to know, is this the last storm in this series of storms? So I briefly want to touch on that. If I could have the next slide, please. You will see that as we go into the middle of the month, this is covering the March 18th through 22nd period. But if I showed you a map even later in the month, it looks similar. There are high probabilities for continued above normal, precipitation across much of California. In fact, heading from the period March 18th through 22nd, there is a 60 to 80% likelihood that we will see above normal precipitation. I want to stress that that's not meant to scare anybody, but it is very probable that we will see additional storms impact the state. Although at this time, the exact details with those additional storms is very low confidence. We're quite uncertain. There's a lot of uncertainty about where these additional storms will track. So what I really want to focus everyone on is let's really pay attention to the next 72 hours as this first storm makes landfall. We will catch a bit of a break for Thursday, Friday, and probably Saturday with only light precipitation expected at times. And then as we get into next week, redirect your focus toward the most updated forecast information as those details become more clear regarding the mid-month trends in weather. I'm very happy to take questions at the end of this, as always. Otherwise, I will turn things back over to you, Deanna. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate your time. Now we're going to hand it over to Brian Ferguson, Deputy Director, Crisis Communication and Public Affairs at Cal OES. He's going to talk a little bit about the state's efforts to get us, ready before the storms, and then during, and maybe a little bit after. Anyways, I'm going to shoot it over to Brian now.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us. As Mr. Lawrence shared from the National Weather Service, we are entering another very challenging period in our state. We continue to experience weather whiplash of drought followed by rain, followed by extreme snow, followed by more rain. And certainly we understand that in many ways this falls hardest on our most vulnerable residents. So, from our point of view here at Cal OES, we are using every tool in our disposal to protect communities throughout our state. And that includes activating our state operations center here in Mather, California to around-the-clock operation. We're coordinating with counties across our state. More than 40 counties have declared local states of emergency. And so working closely with those counties to get them resources. We've also leveraged the federal government who has reached out and, the president today has declared an emergency declaration, which opens up federal resources to help us. And so we have resources both from our National Guard, from CAL FIRE, from so many others on the ground here in California that's actively working to support these communities. And we, through our State Operations Center, are both responding to what's happening right now. Many of you are seeing what's happening in Monterey County, the community of Pajaro, while also simultaneously making plans for what may come next. So pre-positioning assets, aircraft, high water vehicles, swiftwater rescue teams in places where we think that the storm may hit next, and being in there early so that we can rapidly take action to protect those who are most vulnerable. Next slide, please. Can also share that Governor Newsom has declared a state of emergency in 40 counties, which opens up both financial support and state resources, and also waives regulatory barriers. Those counties are listed below. Additional counties, if you don't see your county on here, may be added if they experience impacts in the coming days. And the president's declaration that I mentioned earlier is listed here, which provides emergency life-saving personnel and resources. We may get to a point where the financial resources that you often hear about, individual assistance, public assistance programs, but we're not quite there yet. We're going to have to see what the impacts look like. But what we want to share with you in closing from our state perspective is the thing that's often hardest to control in a disaster is the human behavior and the way that we humans act. And that's why we brought all of you here together, because we want to work with you to leverage the communication to get the word out with all of you as trusted messengers, to help Californians understand the steps they can take to protect themselves, their family members, and their communities from the risks that we're going to see from these storms. And, it's not just the rain. We have so much snow in the mountains that is a risk to many of our populations. And then we also have rain on top of snow, which could lead to downstream flooding. So it will continue to evolve into a complex disaster in the days to come. But what the thing we want to share today is resources we have that you can help get into the community, help people understand some basic steps they can take to stay safe by signing up for alerts, packing a go bag, talking to family members, checking on loved ones who may need a little bit of extra time. And then please know that we view this as a two-way conversation. We're not here just to do a data dump and walk away. We actually want to work with you all to bring information upwards in terms of what you're seeing in the communities, what gaps may be. We already see some good items being shared in the Q&A in the chat about what's going on, what you're seeing, because we want to leverage that by community for community approach to bring additional support into any areas of our state who are hit hard by this. We'll be here at the end to take questions, but for now, I'll turn it back over to Deanna.
Thank you so much, Brian. Appreciate your time and the valuable information that you are providing everyone on the call right now. I'm going to hand it over now to our Chief of Office of Access and Functional Needs, Vance Taylor, who's going to be talking about our efforts and safety for the whole community. Let me hand it over now to Vance. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Dan. I appreciate it very much. So I'm Vance Taylor. I serve as the Chief of the Office of Access and Functional Needs at Cal OES. And one of the things that we really understand is that disasters have a disproportionate impact on individuals with access and functional needs. And that is especially compounded when we see these winter storms impacting same communities over and over and over again. So while we're doing everything on the government side to plan, prepare, respond, there's also some steps that we need individuals throughout the community to take in order to make sure that everybody's putting themselves in the best position to be healthy and independent, secure as these storms come through California. That's, I think, primarily important, or especially important, as we talk about people with access and functional needs. So if you've got a physical, developmental, or intellectual disability, chronic injuries or illnesses, if you're an older adult, a child, have limited English proficiency, or are transportation disadvantaged, but any of these factors put you at a higher risk for negative impacts associated with these events. So just a few tips on the planning side, things that you can do right now to help yourself are going to be to focus on things like preparing for loss of power, right? If you rely on power for a ventilator or other durable medical equipment or assistive technology and devices, then it's not necessarily the rain or even the wind that you're concerned about. It's the impact that that's going to have on power. So keep your equipment charged, conserve power as possible, work with programs like the Disability Disaster Access and Resources Program to secure backup batteries, things that are going to be able to get you over that hump between the time power goes out to the time it can be restored. And then, as always, use your support networks, right? Friends, family, care providers, people that are going to be able to assist during outages. You've got to stay very well coordinated with them, and they've got to be ready to come to action on the event that an outage does occur. The other thing is, have a plan to evacuate. If it comes to it, you've got to listen to local guidance. If local authorities say you got to go, then you got to go. You can't do that thing where we say, well, we've been here 30 years and they say to go and we haven't and we're okay. These storms are unlike anything we've seen in the last 30 to 50 years. So if local law enforcement tells you to go, please listen and evacuate. If you need assistance evacuating, come up with a list. Come up with 5 people that can help. I use a power wheelchair. I don't drive. And so I know I have to rely on other people for that. So on my list, I've got my wife, and she likes me, so she'll help me evacuate. I've got my mom, who lives very close. I always joke that we had 9 good months together in the womb, so we're pretty close. She'll help me. I've got friends at work, neighbors, and other individuals that I can rely on to help me evacuate during an emergency. And while I can't expect that all those individuals will always be available 24/7, I can expect that at least one of them is going to be available to help. So come up with a list, talk to your support networks, have a plan to evacuate. Lastly, get emergency alerts. You can't make informed decisions about what to do and where to go unless you know what the emergency is. You can go to calalerts.org and sign up for free emergency alerts. That'll give you the heads up on the hazards in your area and up to the minute information about where to go and the appropriate steps that you should take for your safety. None of these things cost money. In fact, most of them don't even take much time. But the impact of doing these things isn't just life impacting, it's oftentimes life saving. So work with your friends, work with each other. We have to support one another because as communities, we all rely on one another for this. So plan today so you can be safe tomorrow. Thank you. I'll turn it back over to Deanna.
Thank you so much, Vance. Appreciate your time. I'm now going to hand it over to Corrin Buchanan, Deputy Secretary with the Health and Human Services Agency, to talk a little bit more about some of those resources that we are providing folks during this time. Corrin?
Great. Thanks so much, Diana. Hi, folks. I'm Corrin Buchanan, and I serve as our Deputy Secretary for Policy and Strategic Planning with the California Health and Human Services Agency. So we have mobilized much of the California Health and Human Services Agency to continue to respond to the storms. The team at the Department of Social Services has supported the 33 shelters, and that includes 27 congregate shelters and 6 non-congregate shelters that have been stood up across the state, working with our local and American Red Cross partners. 608 individuals were supported across these sites last night. An additional 12 shelters are on standby and ready to be stood up as quickly as needed. Team at the Emergency Medical Services Authority has pre-positioned assets and staged ambulance strike teams to be prepared to augment local capacity and ensure that the EMS system is able to respond. And the team at the Department of Public Health is proactively engaging with healthcare partners in areas that are most likely to be impacted to ensure that they can both maintain operations and have sufficient capacity. CalHHS has prioritized a work across our 12 departments and 5 offices and with our statewide partners to ensure that we are collectively preparing the most vulnerable in our communities for the impact of these storms. Along those lines, I want to tell you all about a new task force. We stood up this new task force called the Priority Populations Task Force during the January storm event, and we did it again this time, and will be a part of our best practices going forward as we respond to emergencies in California. This task force is co-chaired by the California Health and Human Services Agency alongside our partners with the California Office of Emergency Services and includes 20 different state agencies across the administration. The task force is focused on 4 priority populations. The first is people who are homeless or unsheltered. The second is people who are older or medically vulnerable. The third is people with disabilities, including both visible and invisible disabilities. And the fourth is people residing in congregate facilities, and that could include both medical and non-medical facilities. And our task force has 3 main goals. The first is to be able to develop and disseminate information to local and community partners related to the forthcoming weather conditions and to be able to provide information regarding existing state and federal resources for those priority populations. The second goal is to convene local and county government partners to provide real-time technical assistance on the ground related to engagement of priority populations, to support planning efforts, and to be able to coordinate timely response requests for information from those local partners. And the third goal is to be able to evaluate resource requests that are submitted to the state from our local partners and make recommendations through Cal OES leadership regarding deployment, including the deployment of sometimes scarce resources. So I want to share a couple of resources with you all, and you can see here on the slide related to emergency response and preparedness. I want to start by saying that it is not too late to be prepared. It is never too late, in fact, to get prepared. And you can visit our website at www.chhs.ca.gov, and you can download our template personal emergency plan. This is especially important for those who have access and functional needs. In this emergency resource guide, which is linked here on my slide, you can also find a prescription drug guide. You can find mental health resources. We also have social and healthcare services. And you can find this guide both in Spanish and English. This is really a moment when each of us can do our own part. We encourage folks to check on your neighbor, to connect with an older person in your life, and to offer to support to someone who might need a little bit of extra help, because we all know that we are stronger if we do this work together. I also want to share that the Department of Social Services maintains a list of all of the emergency shelters and warming centers that are activated. And you can find that at their website, which is at the bottom of the slide, www.cdss.ca.gov. Next slide, please. I want to share that if you're concerned about the well-being of a loved one that's residing in a long-term care facility, such as a board-in care or assisted living or a skilled nursing facility, the statewide long-term care ombuds crisis line is available 24/7, and that number is on the slide, and it is 1-800-231-4024. I also want to share that this is, of course, an overwhelming time when there are so many other things that are occurring in our world and our communities. We want folks to know that you are not alone and that it is normal to feel stressed, anxious, and even depressed. We want to encourage folks to reach out if you need to talk to someone, and our Cal Hope line is available. The peer counselors listen with compassion, they provide non-judgmental support, and they can guide you to additional resources that can give you hope and help you cope. The number is 1-833-317-4673, or you can visit the Cal Hope website. And lastly, isolation can be really difficult for our older loved ones and neighbors, and we've established a friendship line for older adults. It is a free crisis intervention hotline and a warm line for non-emergency emotional support for older adults. And it is available by calling 1-888-670-1360. And with that, I just want to say thank you so much to all who've tuned in today, and I'm going to turn it back to Diana.
Thank you so much, Corrin. Really appreciate the time. Now on my end, really going to be providing a little bit of a wrap up, getting to the question and answer portion. I know so many of you have been asking questions, really wanting this to be a conversation though. And so we're going to try to answer as many as we can. I want to remind people about the resources that are available to folks during this time. I've been communicating with many of you through the chat, but go to our listoscalifornia.org website. You know, if there's anything you can do, amplify it out to your networks. We have a whole host of resources in multiple languages related to preparedness, response, and recovery that you can push through your channels, whether that's through social media, online, in person, to your own network. These resources include videos, social media graphics for Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, collateral, flyers, one-pages, quick guides, all on storms messaging. And also we do have county-specific emergency sheets with local, with very helpful local information on, trusted amplifiers in the community. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention too, finally, we have Indigenous language videos on general preparedness and flooding. Those include in different dialects of Mixteco, Triqui, Purepecha, Tlapaneco, Zapoteco, Punjabi, and so many others. También para los que nos están escuchando en español, muchísimas gracias por su atención. Aquí les estoy contestando cualquier pregunta, pero mándanos más preguntas. Aquí estamos para ayudarles también. I know we have simultaneous trans adaptation too at the same time, but I always like to say a little something. So with that, I'm gonna maybe open it up to Q&A, and then there's a few questions in particular. David Lawrence, if you're still there, I know it's hard to kind of anticipate some of the future weather impacts. Wanting to see, folks are curious, even after March, is this going to be abnormal? Are we going to have a little bit of heat in the future? It would be great to just let some folks know about that.
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for those questions. I will state that obviously forecasting beyond 10 to 15 days, as I'm sure many of you are aware, is quite tricky. There are times where we are able to find a signal, if you want to call it that, where we're very confident about what will happen. Unfortunately, this is not one of those particular situations. I can say with a pretty high degree of confidence that the remainder of the month overall looks to feature below normal temperatures. That's cooler than normal conditions across the state, and also the persistence of above normal precipitation with a wet weather pattern continuing. So again, that doesn't mean everyone's in for more flooding the rest of the month, but it does mean pay attention as the storminess is likely to continue, and we'll work out those details. Beyond the end of this month, it is very tricky going forward. This is not a year, as I mentioned, where we can say with a high degree of certainty what will happen. Climatologically speaking, and that's most other years, the storm cycle tends to begin winding down here in the month of April as the snowmelt season begins. But right now, we're just unfortunately not very confident over the next 2 to 3 months after the end of March.
Thank you so much, David. Really appreciate it. I'm going to hand it over to Brian Ferguson. Getting lots of questions for you, specifically on kind of the state's response and whatnot. Number one, we're getting a little bit of one-off questions of, hey, I heard my city did this or my county did that. How can we amplify and maybe solve a problem? What would you say is the best course of action for folks?
Yeah, and again, thank you all for the role that you play in supporting your communities as these events continue to unfold. But all disasters are local, and oftentimes the people with the best information about what's happening in your community is you, as well as your city and county officials. And the way that typically disasters work in the state of California is those closest to the problem are best situated to solve them. And so whether it's a fire, or in this case, a flood, local city officials will be the first line of defense. If it overwhelms the ability of city officials to respond, they can turn to their county, who can bring in additional resources or support them. If it overwhelms the ability of the county to respond, the county can ask for additional resources from the state through our state operations center. And if it overwhelms the ability of the state to respond, the state can ask for assistance from the federal government. So, I think it's important. We are so pleased that you have found us and making the time to chat with us today, but also we encourage you all to, follow and build relationships with your local government counterparts. If you would like to be connected with the emergency managers in your community, please don't hesitate to reach out and we can connect you with that. There's assigned emergency managers in every county in our state who are there to support our communities. And then, importantly, follow them on social media accounts. And so if there are ultimately evacuations or emergency actions that are taken, they'll typically originate from either your county office of emergency services, your county sheriff's office, or your county fire department. And so following along with those folks, they'll provide you the latest. And then if there are, cross-cutting issues or multi-jurisdictional issues, Cal OES is here to assist you with that. So, not just in terms of getting you information, but we also want to put you in a position so that you can be empowered to reach out to the people you need in your respective communities to get the information you need to ultimately keep as many people safe as possible.
Some people are asking too about, very specific, hey, is my area going to flood? Am I going to have impacts over here? Brian, is there a good place to have people go to so that they can look at it? I know you mentioned social media and those official channels to get information.
Yeah, so we'll continue to post updates at Cal OES through our respective accounts, but there's National Weather Services offices based throughout our state that will provide updates. So there's not just one David, there's multiple Davids in jurisdictions throughout the state that are rapidly monitoring in real time what's happening. The Department of Water Resources, if you want to know if there's any rivers at flood stage or what is the status of the reservoirs. We also have information on our Cal OES website about inundation maps. And so that won't be specific to this storm that we're having right now, but it can give you data on historical flooding and what the plans are to mitigate that. And each of your counties has a responsibility under state law to have a local hazard mitigation plan where they actually map the dangers in your county. And you can check those out on the local county websites or reach out to your county emergency services office, where they've actually done pre-work to determine here are the low-lying areas or the areas of our community that we know may be at risk. And, since you all have taken the time to do this today, please know that you can now reach out to us if there are things we can do to assist you or you're seeing gaps or challenges. We want to work closely with you to ultimately keep as many Californians safe as possible.
Getting a few questions, so maybe I have a two-parter for you, Brian. Number one, ensuring that we can talk about the differentiation between the January storm and the federal assistance there, and then what's happening now. And then maybe I'll have you answer that one first.
Yeah, so for these floods, which are different than the wildfires that we've come to be used to in recent years, where typically a wildfire comes and it may be one county, like a Camp Fire was almost solely in Butte County, a little bit in Plumas County. And so there's only 2 counties that have impacts, so smaller geographical area. Whereas these floods, we have impacts from San Bernardino in the south all the way up to Siskiyou near the Oregon border. During those January storms, as many of you may recall, President Biden declared a presidential major disaster declaration, which opens up types of federal assistance, including individual assistance, which is like real money in your pocket, as well as public assistance, which is funding for roads and bridges and public infrastructure. And so that signups are ongoing in the counties that were declared. As a reminder, you only need one person to be a documented individual in your family to be eligible for FEMA aid. And so for families that are mixed of undocumented folks and not, as long as there's a child in the household who was born here, you would be eligible for FEMA assistance. And we know that there are some shortcomings in terms of what the federal assistance programs who they help and who they don't, but do want to get as many people that level of assistance as possible. These current round of storms, there is not at this point just yet a federal disaster declaration that's similar to that. The direct declaration we've received from the president provides direct emergency support. So things like DOD helicopters to fly in and out, more sandbags, Army Corps of Engineer personnel. It is very likely, unfortunately, that we will probably get to the place where this disaster rises to a federal declaration, but that's not happened yet. And we have a lot of resources on our Cal OES website and FEMA's website, kind of laying out eligibility requirements, because it will be different. Each county has a little bit different programs that are available based on the unique needs in the county. And I'll emphasize that, while Cal OES and the state of California would like to spread that support as broadly as possible to the folks who live in our state, there are federal rules, and the ultimate determination on who is eligible and which counties get what sort of support are made by FEMA and the federal government. And what we can say is we pledge on behalf of our state to advocate for as many communities as possible and get just as many Californians the maximum amount of aid that's possible to support them as they rebuild and recover. And at the same time, for those that it may not meet all of their needs through the federal programs, working through our state programs to provide resources and support where perhaps there's gaps in federal support to help those communities get back on their feet.
Thanks, Brian. Sorry, a few more questions for you. So ultimately, too, I think that we're getting, some inquiries when it comes to, damages right now from the storms that are happening, and what's the best kind of recourse to be able to document those and then kind of funnel those up to help, the state see the totality of this. What's the best recourse for people?
Yeah, we'd encourage anyone, if you have impacts on your property or in your community, document that now, both with photos and video and in writing. That will help you, not just if you apply for an insurance later, but these are also the type of things that you can send up to your county to have the county perhaps apply for additional state or federal programs. And so having that information early while it's happening, it is no one's favorite to take pictures of their damaged house or car or school or church, but by having information on those sorts of damages and documenting it, it allows us to make the best possible case to the Federal Emergency Management Agency to maximize the type of support that we can bring into each community.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'm going to maybe hand it over to Corrin if she's still with us. A few questions in particular about some of those resources. Try to respond to as many as I could on the chat. Can you just remind people of some of the resources through CalHope, the Friendship Line, and some of the other ones, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Would it be okay to bring up the slides so we can just have people have the numbers right in front of them? If not, I can just read them. Oh, look, here we go. Okay, great. So the first is our, let's go back one more, please. The first is our emergency resource guide, which is sort of a compendium of a variety of different resources that we've put all in one place. So definitely recommend that people check this out. We have it both in English and Spanish. And then if you're interested in finding out where the shelters and warming centers are active in your community, that's the California Department of Social Services website below. Next slide. And then I had just lifted up a couple of resources for folks who might have a family member or another loved one who's residing in a long-term care facility. Folks often want to know if that facility has been evacuated or not evacuated, whether they're sheltering in place. And if you're in any way having trouble getting a hold of the care facility, you're welcome to call the statewide long-term care ombuds crisis line, which is 24/7, and the number is 1-800-231-4024. And then we are really, as broadly as possible, trying to share information about the CalHope line, which is available also for anyone who needs it. And we have peer counselors who can listen and provide support. And they can also guide you to additional resources in your community for ongoing support. And that number is 1-833-317-4673. And we also have a text-based or a chat-based model, which you can access at calhope.org. And then specifically for older adults is the Friendship Line, which is a crisis intervention and also a warm line for non-emergency supports. And that number is 1-888-670-1360. All right, Diana, thanks.
Thank you so much, Corrin. Some of you are also asking for some of the information through the to send it into the chat. So I'm going to try to do that as quickly as possible. Getting lots of questions of whether we will be sharing this PowerPoint thereafter. We will. You will get a recap of this meeting afterwards with a recording as well, PowerPoint slides, and also the trans adaptation in Spanish and ASL. So I think that that is really key. Brian, I'm going to bring you up maybe one last time, and then we'll kind of get into some of the other resources to remind people about this. Is that we're getting questions about the alerts and, hey, how am I going to get alerted if something happens here? We've talked a little bit about calalerts.org, but do you want to talk, about kind of that process too, and even maybe some of the resources the state has and how we coordinate with locals?
Yeah, thank you. This, as Vance mentioned, as Deanna mentioned, the single best thing for anyone in California to do to stay safe during disaster is to sign up for alerts. It's not a reverse 911 system. In most cases, these are operated by the counties in which you live, and they're mostly opt-in systems. And so our goal is to get as many Californians as possible signed up for emergency alerts so they can get life-saving information when it really comes down to it. So if there's evacuations, if there's a crisis, it could be a fire, a flood, earthquake, having people sign up in your county, in your community. In most cases, these can be signed, you can sign up in English, Spanish, and in some counties, additional languages beyond that. So calalerts.org is on our Cal OES website, which actually has links out to all of the different county web pages that have their alerting system. You can also just Google it and find it for your particular county. But if you take nothing else from this conversation other than reminding people to sign up for alerts, we'd encourage you to do that. The other thing that we want to emphasize is just we are one big community as the state of California, and in a disaster of a significant magnitude, a fire, or in this case, a flood, it will not be likely that there will be enough emergency responders to go to every single door in a crisis. And so that's why it's so important that communities support one another. If you're evacuating, your community or your neighborhood's evacuating, check on that older loved one, or maybe someone who needs a little bit of extra time because they've been ill or have some other issue in their life. But usually the neighbor helping neighbor is our best recourse to keep people safe. And that's why we believe so strongly in the community-based organizations and local faith-based groups and all of you who work in the communities every single day to keep people safe. So that's why, as Corrin mentioned, we have this priority population task force. We understand that disasters disproportionately impact vulnerable Californians. And we want to reaffirm that surviving a disaster should not be based on where you live, how much money is in your bank account, or your zip code, or the language you speak. It should be based on everyone should have a chance to remain safe and get through this together. And we as a state will continue to make that a priority, but also want to work with each of you in your respective communities to do that as we move forward with this challenging time over the next several weeks. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. Vance, if you're still there, last questions, then I'll kind of recap with some of the additional resources that we have. Getting a few questions in regards to, resources available to children and youth with special needs, and then in the event of evacuation orders or significant power outages. So kind of what that means for their equipment or where they can go. And then, apologies in advance, this might be for you or for Corrin, but is there anything being done to ensure assisted living facilities and mobile park homes have that evacuation support? I know you guys are working diligently through the Priority Populations Task Force.
Yeah, because the work falls within our licensing many of these facilities, either within the Department of Social Services, the Department of Healthcare Services, and the Department of Public Health. Each of those systems is outreaching to and proactively engaging with facilities that may be in evacuation zones, or even have proximity to evacuation zones, to ensure that they're have advanced planning and are prepared and have backup power generators and emergency plans that are activated at this time.
Yeah, one of the things that we've done too, understanding that a lot of people in the community, of course, are living independently, is we've reached out to every jurisdiction to ensure that they're able to provide free or low cost, accessible transportation services. Right. So if you need to get out, you shouldn't be limited by the fact that you don't have access to your own transportation. And you shouldn't have to worry about, am I able to evacuate because there's an accessible vehicle? Counties have that capability. The capacity exists. And where there are instances where they're struggling, the state can supplement those resources. So everybody should be able to get out. But please just plan ahead, right? Everybody's going to be calling on the same resource at the same time. Plan ahead, get those emergency alerts. And when you do go, come up with a list of the things you need to take with you. What we find at these shelters is that the number one thing people forget is their medicine. After that, we find that the most commonly forgotten item is a wheelchair charger, right? It's these little items that make such a big difference in our lives. But in the rush of the moment, we don't think through. And the way that I tend to think about it is, if you've ever flown somewhere for a trip, you're hustling to get out the door, you get on the plane, and then you do that mental checklist. What did I forget? Make a list. What are you going to need if you have to evacuate? What devices, equipment, assistive technologies do you need? Charger cables, medicines, that sort of thing. Once you've got that list, put it on your door. And then if you have to evacuate, you don't have to try and think of it all at once. You can check those items and make sure you have the things you need with you. I'll say that our Department of Social Services, along with Red Cross, do an amazing job of keeping shelters physically and programmatically accessible. So if you go to a shelter, it was the case many moons ago, that you could go to a shelter and you had to worry about, can they accommodate my needs? But systems have improved, processes are better, and you can ask for the things that you need, whether that's a shower chair, a walker, a commode. The things that you're going to need to be independent and healthy at those shelters are going to be made available. So thanks to our partners for that, but people need to be empowered with that knowledge.
Thank you so much, Vance. I'm going to wrap it up. You guys have probably been seeing my red emergency backpack here. It says emergency kit on it. It's always a good time to be prepared. And so we want people to have the resources they need so they can be prepared during these times of need. And so it's important to have that information. Please spread it far and wide. Go to listoscalifornia.org. You can make the difference. And, either whether that's phone calls or posting to social media or sending an email, add your information at the tops of websites and trying to get preparedness, response, and recovery resources out there. Hopefully you'll hear from us again on kind of other updates that are happening through the storm and maybe any recovery efforts that are underway. So appreciate the time. If you have any other questions, feel free to drop them in the Q&A. If not, shoot us an email, media@caloes.ca.gov. Thank you so much.